Hi everyone, so in this video we're going to go through the process of installing Active Directory domain services on our Windows Server 2008. So go ahead and open the Server Manager. The first thing we want to look at is changing the name of our server. To do that, simply click on Change System Properties and then click on the Change button. We want to change our name to something that's meaningful to us. Right now it's something that's quite generic, so make sure and give your server a name that means something to you as the administrator. So here I call my server 008-server. Once you've done with that, go ahead and click on OK. Of course, this change will prompt for a restart. You can do it later, or you could proceed to do it immediately. We're going to go ahead and restart the system now. So I'm just going to skip a few frames here and get right to the point of the system booting back up to our login screen. Once you're at the login screen, go ahead, enter your administrator credentials and hit on the enter button to sign in. Great, so we're back on the desktop, back on Server Manager. So our next step is to add the roles for Active Directory. To do that, click on Roles and then click on Add Roles. Click on Next. Select the checkbox that says Active Directory Domain Services. Click on Next again. Click on Next. And then select the option to install. I will do my best to try to explain exactly what Active Directory Domain Services is a bit later on in the video. Good. Once the installation is completed, go ahead and click on the close button. Alright, so here we are, Active Directory Domain Services. Now what we're going to look to do is to run the dcpromo installation file. dcpromo being short for Domain Controller Promotion. We have two ways that we can do that. The first one would be to click on Active Directory Domain Services and then click on the text that says run the Active Directory Domain Services installation wizard, dcpromo in brackets. The second way is to type dcpromo in the search bar after clicking start, and you can also click on the first suggestion that we get. Both options would give us the exact same installation wizard, so it's a matter of choice. But we're gonna keep our video a little bit fancy and do the option where we type it up. So the dcpromo install once again would promote your server to an active domain controller. Go ahead and click on next. You can click on next again. You want to select this checkbox because this is basically telling us that we're also going to install DNS services on our domain controller, which is just an additional role apart from the Active Directory Domain Services. So for this example, we're going to leave that checked and proceed to click on next. Click on create a new domain in a new forest. Make sure that option is selected. Click on next. And here you're going to give your domain a name. Once again, make sure it's something that's meaningful to you as the administrator. For example, if you're working with BMW, you would be calling this domain bmw.local or .com, something like that. I'm going to call mine something that's going to tell me it's for the iTech class that I'm in, itechserver.com, and then click on next. Once this process is completed, we want to select the functional level for our server. Because we're running Server 2008, that is the option that we should select because it would give us maximum functionality for the installation that we're running. Here we see that the DNS server is checked. As I mentioned before, that service is going to be installed as well on our server here. Click on next. On this prompt, don't get scared, it's alright. Let's go ahead and click on yes to continue. I recommend that you don't change any of these settings. Just go ahead and click on next. And of course, you're going to have to set a password for your domain as the administrator. Once that's done, click on next. Here we have our summary page of all these settings that are going to be applied. And that's pretty much it. The installation is now writing the configuration to our domain controller. It's being promoted here in this process. So I'm going to skip a few frames because this part of it does take quite a while. That's it. Click on finish and you're going to be prompted for a restart. So that means once your server restarts, it's actually going to be restarting as an active domain controller within your domain. There is something that we can look out for that's actually going to tell us, hey, our server is actually now a domain controller. And I'm going to point out that to you. It's one of the first things we see before we sign back in, which is actually the name of the domain right before the admin username. That's on the login screen. So once the computer settings have been applied, go ahead and enter the keyboard shortcut, Ctrl-Alt-Delete. We see the iTech server /administrator. Tells us directly we're now part of the iTech server domain. Alright, so we're now back in our fully promoted Active Directory domain controller. So the next thing we're going to look to do is actually pay close attention to the computer information. In the domain section, we clearly see it says itechserver.com. Even the computer name, it shows us the name that we give it, S008-server, and the domain that it's on, .itechserver.com. So for our next step, we want to add our first user to our iTech server domain. To do that, click on Start, Administrative Tools, and then navigate to Active Directory Users and Computers. Expand the itechserver.com option, and then also expand the users folder. You're going to see a bunch of preloaded items or objects within this folder. Don't get scared, that's part of the installation. For us to create our user, we would right click in a blank space and then click on new and then select the user option. So the user object creation wizard basically allows us to give the first name, last name, and user logon name of the user. In this instance, we're going to call our user James Yeager, just because it sounds a bit cool. And for the user logon name, in real world examples, you would see things like companies using the first name, the first letter of the user's first name and then their last name. Or they may even reverse that and use the user's last name and then the first letter of their first name. Just make sure that whatever format you choose, that it remains consistent for all your users throughout the organization. So for this example, I'm just going to keep mine in a basic format, the first letter of the user's first name and then their last name. And just remember, this would be the user logon name. Once you've entered that information, click on next. You can assign a password to the user. What I would suggest also is that in this example, I will uncheck the user that says the user must change password at next to log on. But in a real world example, that's something you actually want to leave selected so that the user would be prompted to enter their own password. Alright, so go ahead and click on next. Right, so we have successfully created our first user within our iTech server domain. I just want to show you guys a few cool things with the properties of the user that you can take a look at. For example, you can add their email address based on whatever company you're with at that time. You can even enter the actual address of the employee if HR provides that information. The member of section is also very important. This gives you control of certain access levels for any user. For example, if they have unlimited internet access, if they can access the VPN, etc. And of course, the account section also tells us what the user logon name is. Some users might say, hey, I forget my username, could you remind me what it is? You can come to this section, look at user logon name and advise the user what their logon name would be. Of course, it's the same thing we selected, which is James Yeager for this particular user. If they also become locked out of their account, this is where you would unlock the user and allow them to once again access the domain or network resources by selecting unlock account and clicking on apply. Lastly, we're going to want to make a few important network changes. Click on Network and Sharing Center. So for the sharing and discovery section, we want to make sure that network discovery, file sharing, and public folder sharing are all turned on. This will allow each user to easily access network resources that the administrators provide. So traverse each of those options and ensure that sharing is turned on. Click apply so that these settings would take effect on the server once you've selected the desired option. Next, we want to assign a IP address to our server because currently we don't have a functioning IP address. So as you see here, we're going to enter an IP address that's going to allow our server and the clients that we are going to assign IP addresses as well to effectively communicate. And this would bring us to the end of our video. In part 2, we're going to add our client machine to the domain and log in with the same user that we just created. So see you guys soon.